I'm Vanessa, and I'm here with Meagan, and she is going to share with us today a little bit about her experience of going away. And I know a little bit about this process, Meagan, but I don't even know the name of where you went or why you went. So I'll just open it by saying, would you let us know what brought about this need to do something, and then what you found, and then about the experience?
I had been finding, I was talking to my spiritual director and saying to her, I find that I'm going away on these mini retreats or
Mm.
these times away and coming back feeling like I had a sip of water and it had wet my lips and, maybe my throat a little bit, but I was still parched. And it didn't seem to be filling me, I guess, in the same way I had hoped.
Mm.
Time apart, time with God, it was like just the tip of where I was at. And so I started to look for retreats that offered more around healing, around self-care, those kind of pieces, and was encouraged by leaders within our denomination to search out that. And they sent me some, but I found most of the ones in our part of the world
Mhm.
were either more secular based or kind of the other extreme of our church, a little bit more kind of laying on hands and hoping for the best,
Right.
which is lovely, but not quite where I was at. And the other piece I really found is that, as you know, I'm part of an intentional community, a Emmaus community. I serve in leadership with amazing folk at the Abbey Church. But both of these settings aren't exactly mainstream church, parish, congregation settings.
Yeah.
And so the folk I would talk to, it would take a long time for them to just understand the language or the context of the
Right.
work I was doing, as well as its multifaceted stresses and challenges and deep joys. So I would kind of realize that in order to get to the work I wanted to do, it would
Yeah.
take a long time to do so. And so I came across the Kineo Center through the church planting networks. And I went on their website, and the first thing I saw was a quote from the Reverend Howard John Wesley that said, "The soul exhaustion that pastors experience cannot be fixed with a nap and a vacation. We need a full-on recovery, and we need guides that will help us get there."
Mm.
So it was like, wait a minute, this is exactly what I've been experiencing, that
Yeah.
and feeling that something was missing. And I don't know that I would have named recovery as a part of that.
Mm.
But as I looked more into their story, I started to hear and feel such resonance with their own experience as well as what they were trying to offer.
Wow.
Another piece on their website by Dan Allender says, ministry leaders become the fulcrum of people's emotional, relational, paternal, and spiritual expectations. And
Wow.
these expectations eventually crush them. It's a silent epidemic.
Wow.
So that seemed pretty intense.
Yeah.
But I think for many of us, and not just ministry leaders, in our own relationships over COVID,
Mhm.
we have experienced that kind of fulcrum,
Mhm.
that within the intensity of pandemic, within the intensity of being church together in this time,
Mm.
if you're in any kind of relational work, the expectations, the fears, the anxieties are just so pronounced. And to bear those alongside your own uncertainty and challenge within this time is, it's a deep, deep challenge. And And so Kineo Center, which you can, and I encourage you to Google and find out more about, it was started out of a realization of the profound burnout and trauma that had come as a result of the betrayal, the hardship, the work of the church. And we don't often want to think about that. We want to see the church as a place of healing and love and inclusion and all of that. And of course, the church as the body of Christ is that. It is that. And yet, as a human institution, we are so often participants in harm and in real pain that we place on each other and are a part of. And so this ministry center was developed to respond to and care for weary and wounded leaders of all sorts, all parts of the church, lay and ordained and everything. So that's how I found them.
And that's such a cool story. We're just to the part of finding them, but what I notice is just your awareness of going on retreats or taking a nap or, that quote, a drink of water, how it just wasn't enough. So that's my first kind of noticing is your own awareness of I'm still thirsty or I'm still parched, and how vulnerable that is and how uncomfortable that is to live like that. And then to name it and say, I need something. And then to be offered some options and to look at them and recognize what you need and where you are located, who you are, and the kind of familiarity that you might need in order to start drinking, kind of sooner rather than later. So your persistence or creativity, I don't know the best word for it, in saying thank you, but no thank you, or not yet, which led you to a website that had these quotes that just sound so validating. So just anything else to say about what it was like now that you've kind of just named that arc out loud, what it was like to, the first time, if you can remember that, recognize like, I need more, that drink was not enough, to finding the website and it becoming a possibility to go there?
Yeah, I think you're using the word vulnerability is huge, because that isn't, my personality is such that I want to be part of, forward movement of being as strong as I can in order to create space, in order to facilitate growth and change, and to recognize within myself that I was at the point where my capacity to do that was fractured itself. That's not an easy place to come to. And I had gone on, I had hiked the Juan de Fuca Trail solo. And part of the big learning in that hike was a sense that God was really saying, you can rest, you can stop, you can take your time. You actually don't need to push through over and over again. And how quickly then I forgot that lesson all over again. And so I felt like this persistent invitation to hear that, to hear the really sacred invitation into rest, into Sabbath, into setting down one's burdens, that is holy, sacred work. As much is the work of ministry in life, but that for me at this time, the invitation was something different, and to acknowledge that and accept that was not the easiest process, but yeah, a beautiful one.
Thanks for just saying all that, because it is just teaching me or reminding me that, rest or Sabbath or healing doesn't necessarily only happen within the window that we think it is, like you're a week away, for example. But even going back to hiking the Juan de Fuca and hearing this message and then recognizing that you lost it, but you came to, you came to your senses. And then it, to me, in terms of a hike, if this leave you took was, like a hike as well, the hike started in a way, it feels like when you were vulnerable enough to admit, I need help, or I need something. I have to do something. It wasn't just the plane ride away or something like that.
Right.
Like
Yes.
the hard stuff started earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, where do you want to go from here?
I think I really want to share some of the process, because I think it is so important, and yet it is so simple, as is everything always. So Kineo, of course, coming from the Greek word in the letter to the Philippians, that process of Christ's self-emptying. And
like kinesis or kenosis.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is where the name comes from. And they were really clear that it is a process, that this isn't like point A to point B, and that it is rooted within our story of Christ's life and death and resurrection. That is the basis of it, which was so important for me. Wow. So I'll talk you through a little bit of this process, and I want to just really emphasize that all of this work is from Tanya and Dan White Jr. From the Kineo Center, and just really want to honor their work, their story, their lives, and their incredible ministry. This is such important work, and such a gift that they, through their own pain, they have found a way to offer this kind of healing. So I just wanted to be sure that I credited them for all of this. So what they led me through, and I also want to say it was this incredible privilege. I was the only one there those 4 days.
No way.
So it was me and on my stool and these two incredible leaders. Yeah. And they led me through this experience. And I mean, who gets that? It was pretty amazing. So the process was the retreat that I went on was called Pain and Possibilities. And at each stage we would start, and then I would have my session with them, and then I'd have the rest of the day to journal, to reflect, to walk, to pray, to sit with the concepts and ideas. And this was not, it was in Puerto Rico, so I will not pretend this wasn't in a beautiful, wonderful setting, but it was not easy either. They were not gentle in the way of letting me off easy. They were really concerned with the importance of facing what we have experienced, what the repercussions of the actions that we have done as a result of the experiences. And then at every point to be wrapped in grace, to, regardless of what had been stirred up and was deliberately being stirred up, to then say, okay, we have acknowledged that, and now we're going to wrap that in God's love and God's presence and God's grace, which was so incredibly beautiful. And I think such an amazing model of saying there is stuff that we have done as a result of the things that happened to us in our life. And we do need to own it, to work to reconcile it, to work to change things within our own lives. And we need to do that consistently in God's loving presence and forgiveness and grace. So it was this continual cycle of, we can't actually pretend that nothing bad happens,
Right.
but we actually have to also then hold that within the cradle of God's arms. Anyway, so the process, and I'll hold it up. If you can see it there, it starts with disruption. And I loved their description of what disruption is. They said disruption is anything that begins to ache, that unsettles what is or that was. And in disruption, they said the question we're asked is simply, why does this hurt so much? And I thought that was so profound that we don't start with, why is this happening? Or how come this person did this? Or, or why is this community facing whatever it's facing? You can take it on personal, you can take it on more collective levels. But to go back to actually, regardless of what it is, why for me is this hurting so much? It's a profound question to sit with and to invite God into that process with. And then what you may have seen there is there's a little line that goes off to the side that's called Detour. And so they said that so often when we don't linger in that question, when we don't stop with the disruption to say what's going on here, are often, be that individually or collectively, will detour. And those detours can look like defense, they can look at denial, they can look at distraction. And folk probably, when pushed, will know which one they default into. And the purpose of that detour, they say, is to not feel, to not reflect, to not ask the questions. And so whether that's distraction, where we're just like, no, we're good, all good here. Whether that's moving into blaming or defense or whatever that is, that when we do that, we don't sit with that question of, why is this hurting? And so from that point of disruption, the actual invitation is into descent. And so that's the next part. Which to me, the first thing I thought of was Holy Saturday, that place between the cross and resurrection, that we don't want to linger. We want to move. We want the pain to be over. And yet the invitation is actually to descend and to rest in that. And so the question in descent is, what is God saying to me down here? To move down into and towards the pain, as opposed to distracting ourselves from it or moving away from it. While on that second day, so the first day in disruption, they had me name what is your go-to detour. And they were really, they really pushed me. They were like, okay, and what are the consequences of this? So name as many as you can think of, like, what has that actually caused harm, instead of your process of healing by detouring. And so then in descent, I was sitting with it, and it's not easy, right? It's not easy to look at that, to face not only what led you there, but then my own choice or my own inability to process how then that caused harm that I had no intention of doing, and yet was a cause of my inability to process that. So I was sitting with that in descent, and as I did so, I had brought, it's not going to show again, I'd brought Held, Blessings for the Depth, the book of blessings from Enfleshed, and came across this blessing called Blessing Over Emptiness. And it's It's written by the founder of the Transgender Crisis Ministry Network, as well as she's done incredible, or they have done incredible other things. The Reverend Elena Kaling Cobb. Do you mind if I read that blessing?
No.
Okay. So this is called Blessing Over Emptiness. Blessed are you, barren land, desert field, salted earth. Blessed are you that cannot grow, that will not grow, that cannot bear to conceive the anguish of growth. I do not curse you with promises of healing, restoration, or renewal. You who cannot hear it and cannot hold it. You whose humanity is a tenuous, fragile memory. I will sit beside you, husk and shattered vessel. I will sit inside your gnawing fast, your thirst, your numbness, and your void. I will laugh with you at the hollow of the wind, shed tears unknown and unbidden. I will join you in the empty, your endless lack abiding within me also. And I will remember for the both of us. I will hold for you the green in the terrible famine of these moments. I will keep it far from you, out of sight, not even a whisper upon my face. I will live as you, a creature of the dust, till you can smell the air of far-off places, and finally dream of rain. I was so struck by that blessing because we do tend to, we want to move so quickly. Even in our encouragement of someone else who's suffering, we want to be able to, it'll get better, or we believe in resurrection, or any of the words that we use and that are on one level so deeply true. Mm-hmm. And yet, I think the invitation I heard in Descent is to simply be there, that shattered vessel, and to know that God is not, the cheerleader pushing us to the end of the race, but actually, I love that image of like this husk that God has curled God's self into to be with you in this descent into this place of shadow or whatever it is for you. That actually God is just there waiting until the time is right and you dream of rain again, which is so beautiful. So in a time of disruption and into descent, they talked about there's something foundational that has been stirred, cracked, shaken. And so the bringing it down, we move into awakening. And it's that question of what is God revealing now out of all of this? What is that place that God is showing that is coming out of these places? Which is that piece of starting to say, okay, having sat with this now, having not run away, having been held within this emptiness, what is God showing me? What are the barriers or the hurdles to growth that I'm now only just seeing for the first time? Or maybe I knew all along and didn't have the courage to look deeply at. But what is being brought to light? What is being illuminated that I might now wonder about, have curiosity about? Maybe it's just to name and nothing else yet. But what is God revealing out of this time? Yeah. And so then other things there, what are the relationships that are in need of mending? With myself, with my partner, my friends, with my community, whichever level you're working with. And where is there an invitation to forgiveness, to self-compassion, to peace, and to rest? And then, as you move through that, the final stage, of course, as you might expect, is into renewal and resurrection. And the question there that we lingered with is, what is God bringing to birth? And what do we need to bury, to water, to let come to birth? And in this last, we had spiritual exercises that we worked through each time at the beginning of the session. The very first one was eating a piece of mango. And what did that say to me about God?
Oh my God.
The pungent taste, the smell, the texture, all of these things. And in this final day, when we looked at renewal and rebirth and reconciliation, the exercise that they led me through was planting a pepper plant. And what was profound about this was on a couple levels. I've done a similar exercise, but in a very sanitized way. The ground was already prepared, and you had your little flower, and you went out and put it in. Mm-hmm. None of this was prepared, so I didn't know it was coming. The ground was not tilled, so I had my long nails, my skirt, and through this process, I think it showed so many pieces of, not knowing which the weeds were and which weren't, that I was to prepare the ground with, feeling the hardness of the ground, feeling my nails break as I tried to dig around the plant, feeling the way that the roots, some of them would come up easily and some were so deep and so interlocked that they actually needed more tools in order to actually prepare that ground. And then the fragility of this little plant that would one day bear fruit, but I wouldn't be there to even see it. And the trust and care of knowing that it would then rely on others to water, to nurture. So there were so many pieces in that simple little exercise of what it means to move into rebirth, reconciliation, resurrection. And the tools and the community and the people and the spiritual presence that needs to accompany that. And so much of it being surrender as well. Surrender into acknowledging what I don't know, the questions I have, the tools that I think I might need, and then the deep trust that others will come alongside me and others will come after me as well. So if it's a ministry I've planted or a possibility I've planted in my heart or in the world, that actually it's not on us to see it through ever alone. Those were some of the pieces of this process.
Wow, that sounds so incredible and so simple. You started by saying it was amazing and it was simple. Mm-hmm. There's a simplicity to that cycle, but it's so evocative, like the disruption, staying with the pain, naming of the detours and the consequences, the descent and the blessing over emptiness, the awakening, looking for what's being revealed, and not a sanitized version of renewal and rebirth. A dirty, nail breaking, surrendered, freeing experience of planting this pepper plant in 4 days.
In 4 days.
Before Holy Week.
Before Holy Week, yeah. And the other thing they were clear about is it's not done. So the arrows on that thing.
Oh.
And then you're like, right. And here we go again. Which I also appreciated, because I think we can get into this idea that, when I figured everything out, then,
Yeah.
And so they were saying, yeah, we go through this cycle as a couple. We're intentional about what have been the disruptions in our marriage. We go through this individually, and we go through this as a community and as a church. Wow. And I thought that was powerful, that the intentionality about that. And I think also to then, I don't know if normalize is the right word, but instead of disruptions being something that don't exist, like, only in the extreme situations would we ever have to deal with this. Actually, it's just a part of this natural cycle of creation, of our Christian story, and of our lives, that it only goes off the rails when we don't attend and don't submit ourselves to that process, that then actually things just get a lot more scary.
Wow. I love that you said that disruption is is part of the process, not like an aberration of the norm.
Yeah.
It's one of those spots on the cycle.
Yeah.
Well, for maybe a last question, if something comes up for it, anything you were surprised by? I mean, I'm sure you're surprised by so many things, but yeah, as you hear yourself just, process what this was like leading up to it, and then sharing with us what it was like during, is there a surprise that kind of rises to the surface in terms of what you were expecting and then what you experienced, or just a reflection that you're like, that was new for me?
I was reflecting today that I think so much of this is still in process. Having moved very quickly through, as you said, Holy Week, and then into, in many ways, a new disruption of leaving and of discerning the way forward on many levels. And so I think the encouragement of having something to come back to say, when I'm feeling lost at sea in all the changes that I'm facing, that our world is facing, our community is facing, there's this simple process that I can return to that has the gift of God's presence to lead me through, and to, I think maybe one of the surprises was not needing a resolution. Like, I think in something of the circular nature of this, recognizing that it may be years and years before actually this one disruption moves toward renewal or reconciliation. It may not even happen in my generation. Maybe it is my children's generation, that perhaps on more of a global level, that something of that reconciliation happens. But that I can still be faithful to it, that I can submit myself to God's gentle pruning in my life, and to return to that consciously and intentionally, I think is an invitation that I'll carry from it. Yeah. And there was a whole piece, we did a whole day on the Enneagram.
Oh, cool.
So I won't go into all of that now, but I think it was another piece that was along those lines of, they used, when they talked about the Enneagram, they talked about it in terms of creational ways as well. What happens when fire meets paper versus metal versus water, whatever.
Yeah.
And so these natural elements, and to learn more about yourself and how you might meet those elements as a way of self-learning and as a way of meeting others in the fullness of who they are, without projecting, well, you should therefore meet water in the same way I do, So there were some beautiful learnings around that. But I think a piece of this was just that submitting to the fully embodied incarnational faith that we've given our lives to, and knowing that that is going to mean disruption and it's going to mean dissent. And God willing, it'll mean God showing us, revealing to us places for growth and for change. And ideally, one day, a renewal. Maybe in just tiny ways each day, and maybe in some pretty life-changing ones.
Meagan, that was so you just there. You like snuck in a blessing. You just turned that closing sentence into a blessing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thank you for giving voice to a silent epidemic. Remembering that quote that that was on that website, and I heard it. I heard you say it, and I thought I haven't known really the weight, the crushing weight that some of you experience in your role. So just in these 20 minutes, you gave voice to that. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your questions.
Mm-hmm.